up everybody, Maran here for another car review. This is of course the 2018 Lexus NX 300 F Sport. Huge thanks to Lexus for providing me with this very nice NX to review for you guys today. So about the NX, well, these were revealed a couple of years ago and is, the smallest of the Lexus crossovers. And I think it's a really cool look. I've really started to warm over to this Lexus grille and the more aggressive styling. I think it looks really good, especially with this light refresh here that we have for 2018. So you have the more aggressive front bumper, even more aggressive than before. You have these new headlights, which are resculpted, and I really like the 3 LED elements you have there in them. Kind of reminds me of the LC, sports car they have and a few others, and a really nice look there. Of course, you have the very large grille that you can't miss, and overall I think it's a pretty good look up front there. Coming down to the sides, you have these very attractive looking wheels. I like the two-tone coloring here on them, and then you have these sculpted fenders both in the front and in the rear that just look really cool and give it a really muscular appearance. And with a lot of other crossovers in this segment looking really squished, this has really nice proportions too. It's still a pretty large SUV even though it's a small SUV. Some of the other ones are just like lifted hatchbacks. Even though it's more sporty in its appearance, again, because of the fenders and things like that, I think it still, has a really good and traditional SUV look as well. Going out back there, you have those very futuristic looking taillights that I think have a nice amount of complexity to them and look really cool. And then also you just have, the more sculpted rear bumper there, especially here on the F Sport version. It's a little sportier than what you would get on a regular non-F Sport version of the NX. But they all look really great. And so overall, I think it's, a really cool looking little crossover. As for the interior of the Lexus NX, well, it's a really cool place to be, actually. So first thing you notice is the heavy doors. All Lexuses have this really high quality, heavy feeling to the doors that I really love, and it really helps it to feel solid and really well built and put together. And that also translates into the interior here, which looks very nice, and everything again feels very nice and solid and high quality. But first thing, sitting down in these seats, really nice leather seats here. They're a little sportier, I believe, in the F Sport version here, with some larger bolsters, both for the torso and for the thighs. But it's not overly aggressive by any means, and it's totally appropriate for a crossover of this type. But they just hold you in nicely. But they still have they're wide enough to give you plenty of wiggle room. They have lumbar and plenty of adjustment. Just the basics there. But they're a little softer than some previous F Sport Lexus seats that I've sat in, and so these are really just super comfortable seats. They're not firm at all, just really feel good. And so overall, really well done seats. Next to the steering wheel, which is a typical Lexus steering wheel, which is a really great thing. They're all really well done, and this one is basically just like all the others, with a really nice 9-3 grip, nice little 10-2 notches. It's a thicker wheel for sure. That's also part of the F Sport treatment, I believe, here, and this one has a little badge to go along with it on the bottom here. And you have the paddle shifters, which I think are a little larger here on the F Sport version as well. They are plastic, but they have a metal look to them, and they're good again for a crossover of this type. And then you have a few buttons here on the steering wheel, just for your adaptive cruise and controlling the gauge cluster and stuff. And that's it. And I like how Lexus has still retained the cruise control stock here, so that it's separate, so you don't have a ton of buttons on the steering wheel, and you have all those cruise control buttons down here on the stock, which is great. And I really like that. And so overall, really well done steering wheel. Next are the gauges here in the NX, which are a little simpler than some of the other Lexuses, which a lot of them have gone to a completely digital setup. This still has your analog gauges, but they're good, easy to read, pretty simple but attractive gauges. So nothing to complain about, but nothing to write home about either. And then in the middle there, you have a nice little digital display that will just show your basics, but I love how you can see a boost gauge there, which is a really nice inclusion since this is a turbocharged vehicle. And it's a cool little display for it too. But then you can scroll through, digital speedometer, all the other basics as far as fuel economy, trip information, and then there's also, you can go for the navigation stuff or audio, all those types of things, and of course setting up all the different settings here in the vehicle. And so overall, a really nice gauge cluster. Coming over to the center of the dashboard here, it's a really cool design. It's different than any other Lexus, and really different than a lot of most other stuff in this segment as well. First thing right up top here, you have this nice widescreen display that's a little larger here for 2018, I believe, as well, and looks really nice, very high resolution. It's Pretty good infotainment, so you have this little mouse pad thing like you would see on a laptop. That's what controls it, and there's a little bit of haptic feedback there to help you know when you've landed on something when you're driving. It still isn't as simple as a basic touchscreen, and it's even not quite as intuitive as some of the controller wheels sometimes, since those seem to register your inputs better than this does sometimes. But it's fine. You can get used to it, and you know, I've used several Lexuses with this already now, and it's not a big deal, you know, because there isn't a ton of stuff with this infotainment. You know, there isn't any kind of Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, unfortunately, although, you know, hopefully Apple CarPlay will at least be coming maybe for 2019 or 2020 model years, considering that has now been rolled out in the 2019 ES. But in the meantime, here in the 2018s, they do not have CarPlay, which is a shame, because that's really the only thing that really, you know, makes this feel a little dated. The maps and stuff are all, you know, kind of average, nothing too high-tech. You know, there are some competitors that have a more high-tech, you know, type of infotainment system with a little more feature content, but you know, this still looks really good, and I do like the split screen setup, so you can have multiple things shown there on it, and it does all the basics, and it's thankfully you still have a volume and a tune knob, so very easy to just tune through radio stations with the knobs. You don't have to fuss with any kind of goofy menus like you have to do with some of the competitors, and so I do appreciate that about it. And overall, it's a pretty good infotainment system. Coming down, you see a nice analog clock, and then your little displays here that are black and white, monochromatic here for the climate control, the settings there, and you have the little rocker switches that are actual metal and feel really nice there for the rocker to change those settings. And then you have another little row of buttons, which again feels really nice, and again just better than what you get in a lot of the other vehicles in this segment, where it's a lot of plastic. This, you have either metal stuff or metal looking stuff, and so either way it just looks nicer and feels nicer. You do have very tiny little buttons here for your heated and cooled seats, but I like that they actually have physical buttons for those, and they're right in easy reach, and so the small size doesn't really bother me too much to those. Coming down, you have a little storage cubby here, which isn't too usable. You can, you know, not large enough for a cell phone or anything like that, but maybe the key, something like that could fit in there, although there isn't any kind of ridge to hold things in place, so I feel like under acceleration things could just slide right out of there. But anyway, nice to have a little space there for knickknacks. Then you have your volume and tune knob and a few radio shortcuts and CD drive. And then coming down, you have your drive mode selector here, which is again really nice and metal finished. And then you have, you know, a couple other buttons and that you know, mouse pad, you know, trackpad type thing here. And so overall, you know, everything's nice and concise, and you know, just contained to one little area here, and not too overwhelming, not too many buttons. As far as storage space in the NX 300, it's actually pretty good, you know, for an SUV of this size. So first off, in the doors, you have a large map pocket with a bottle holder, which is nice to see. Coming over to the center here, like I said, aside from that little thing right by the volume and tune knobs, I also have two cup holders, and there's a clever little hidden thing as well. So you have this nice, very softly padded area to rest your hand while you're using this trackpad. But you'll see this little tab, and you pull on this, and you'll see a mirror, which is a very clever inclusion, and you know, something you don't see really in any other vehicle. So that's kind of nice. And then you have a felt-lined little cubby in here, which again isn't large enough for, you know, average-sized smartphones these days, but you could fit the key or, you know, some other small, you know, square objects in there. And you have your center armrest, which is really nice and softly padded, and I mean, it's really nice and squishy. Feels really great. And anyway, you open that up, and then you see right up top here this little tray, which is again felt lined and has a little coin holder space as well, and that's large enough to fit your average, you know, smartphone sizes. And then you have this deep, larger area here, which is, you know, really great. You can fit all kinds of stuff, you know, large sunglass holders, all that type of stuff. You'll see a power outlet, two USB jacks, and an auxiliary jack in there as well, and so plenty of space in there to fit, you know, most of the stuff you're going to need to fit in a center armrest, and so overall, a pretty good amount of space up front here. Backseat space in the NX is also, I think, much better than some of the competitors. I mean, by the numbers, I think it's right on average, but in my personal experience, this seems more spacious and less cramped than some of the others, especially stuff like the Mercedes GLA, which is again like basically a lifted hatchback. You just have so much more room in the back there, both with your leg room. I'm 5'9", me sitting behind myself. I have about 4 inches of leg room to spare, which again, for the smallest of the crossovers here from Lexus, I think is a really generous amount of space. Headroom is also pretty good as well. It's also a nice, soft, comfortable back seat. It does have a recline feature, so you can you know, recline it a little bit or have it a little bit further forward. They of course do fold flat as well. You'll find a center armrest there in the middle as well, which you know, folds down, and you'll see two cup holders in there, and you know, nicely softly padded armrest. The only complaint I do have with the back seat there is you can see that the middle seatbelt anchor is like 1/3 of the way into the driver's side rear passenger's seat back there. And that just seems a little, uncomfortable. I mean, I think if you're really trying to, pack people in there, I feel like that could kind of be a little bit annoying, just having that digging in your back for, a longer period of time. But yeah, otherwise it's good. You have bottle holders in the doors, and you have air vents there as well, which is nice to see. So overall, for the most part, it's a very nice back seat. Trunk space in the NX is also pretty good, and I think, again, slightly better than some of the competitors out there, with an average crossover size space there. You have that little cover, which you could remove if you want to stack things more. But, it's got a good depth to it. It's, pretty long, goes pretty far back, nice and wide. You can lift up the floor there, and you'll see a bunch of additional other little cubbies to fit things if you want to put them beneath the floor there. And even beneath that, you'll find a spare tire still. So they didn't give up the spare tire to give you that additional space. You still have both of those things. And so overall, it's a really nice cargo area, and it's, of course, a power closed tailgate as well, which is always a nice feature. All right, so start and go for a drive. The Lexus NX here has a not quite as nice key as some of the other higher end Lexus models, but it still is very nice. You do have a little bit of a plastic, it feels like metal, but I think it is plastic still. But it has a pretty nice key still. It has some buttons there on the back. Of course, keyless access and push button start as well. So you just leave the key in your pocket, hit the engine start button, and it starts right up. All right, so setting off in the 2018 Lexus NX 300 F Sport here. So the first thing you notice, I think, is the excellent visibility you have here in the NX. You can put the seat pretty low, and that would, affect your forward visibility a little bit. But if you raise the seat up nicely, I mean, you have pretty thin A-pillars here with a nice little window there, and the mirror doesn't get in the way. So very good as far as that goes, and a nice large windshield. The dashboard drops down pretty well, so very easy to see out of. View out of the back is also really good, although you do have the headrest there, get in the way in a little bit, but in the middle part there, it's very good. And also, view out of the sides is pretty good with nice large side windows. Other things to note right off the bat, you have pretty good throttle response here. It's very sensitive to all of your inputs, very responsive and predictable in its use so far. Also, a brake pedal has a lot of dead travel, and you have to push it a long way in order to get the brakes to really, press down hard. So not super sensitive, but, it makes it so you don't have to be super delicate either with your inputs. So that just comes down to personal preference. Steering also has a nice feeling to it. It's a little bit heavier, but not too heavy, and feels, a little sportier than most of the stuff in this segment. But for the F Sport version, I think it feels about right. But we'll go ahead and put it into sport mode. There's no Sport Plus in the F Sport version of the NX 300. It's just the regular Sport. So we put it in the sport mode here, and let's turn it on this back road and see how it does. Here we go. A little bit of a delay, and then this transmission figures out what we want to do, and then it picks up really nicely. It's not a ton of power, so the NX 300, although they changed the name, it used to be called the NX 200T. That made more sense. It's called the NX 300 now, but it still has a 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder engine, and in this application does 235 horsepower and 258 pound-feet of torque, and so that allows this thing to get up and going 0 to 60 in about 7 seconds. And that 7-second number actually feels about right, but maybe a little quicker. I would honestly say it would maybe be like a mid 7-second vehicle, just in the way that it feels. Mostly, I think, because there's a little bit of turbo lag that you always kind of feel, where you have to wait and then you feel the turbo come on. It's like almost an old school type of turbo sensation, which is fun, especially if you're, a fan of older imports and you enjoy that type of thing. But it's not quite as early with the turbo boost as it is in some of the competing vehicles that have turbos that come on at super low RPMs. I mean, this does start to spool at low RPMs, but it just feels like it doesn't come on full blast, until a little bit later on. You also have a 6-speed automatic transmission here in the NX, and so, it does a pretty good job. It's not super, responsive, but in sport mode here, it does, feel a little more eager to downshift whenever you're up and going. It was just whenever I was stepping on it from a stop where it wanted to start in second still, and it had to figure itself out and put it back into first and then go. But, once it did that, then it's been pretty good here with, being responsive. As soon as I get on the gas, yeah, it gives me the downshift. So it's pretty intelligent. And the 6 gears, although, a lot of stuff uses a higher amount of gears these days, 6 still seems fine to me. There hasn't been a time where I've been wanting for it to be in a better, you know, gear or RPM or something. It seems to do a pretty good job. I will say though, you can definitely tell that this engine heavily relies on that turbo, because it feels a little sluggish until that turbo comes on. And this SUV, I guess, is one that you do have to drive it a little bit harder. 235 horsepower is right in line with most of the stuff in this class, but it's still just, you know, obviously for someone who's just daily driving, going from point A to point B, they're not, you know, pushing it hard, they're not driving enthusiastically, it's going to feel like enough power. And even whenever you do get on, you have it in the sport mode here, it does, you know, cooperate with you, like I said, with the transmission, you know, trying to help out and whatnot. But yeah, it's just, it's a little bit of a heavy vehicle too. It's, you know, 4,050 pounds, and I think part of that is what you're feeling as well whenever you stomp on it. You know, 235 horsepower, 258 pound-feet of torque, can move 4,000 pounds, just not with as much speed as, you know, a sedan that's 3,500 pounds or something like that, you know, where this type of power would feel really punchy and sporty. It doesn't feel quite as punchy in this application, but still does, you know, feel pretty good. And again, for a, you know, small crossover, I think it is plenty. But I put it into manual mode here, and let's try the paddles. It does a pretty good job. You know, it's fairly quick. It's the typical Lexus tuning where upshifts are pretty snappy, not, you know, super fast, but pretty snappy. But the downshifts are usually what you're waiting on a little bit more, but neither are bad, you know, and for every once in a while it's fine. You know, I just wouldn't drive around in manual mode all the time or anything. But as we're coming up some corners here, let's see how the F Sport version of the NX handles here. So, it's got some body roll to it and some lean. It feels a little top heavy. Again, I think part of that is because, again, we're talking about a 4,000 pound vehicle, and it also doesn't help that this is only running 225 wide tires. So, and they're not even sporty tires, even though this is the F Sport version. They're just Yokohama Geolanders. So, you know, I think, and they're also 60 series sidewalls, so a little bit of flex there that you feel, and, you know, it doesn't make it feel super sporty. I do wish, you know, for the F Sport version, maybe they would have gone with something a little more low profile, but, you know, again, it looks right on this vehicle, you know, being a, you know, a crossover, but it does handle, you know, well enough. Again, for the type of vehicle we're talking about here, it does just fine, and steering actually continues to feel really good whenever we're going around corners here. There isn't a ton of feeling in it, but like I said, it has a nice weight to it, and I think that gets a little heavier here in sport mode as well, but it really just feels good. And, you know, like I said, the braking performance is decent. It's just, again, lots of travel to the pedal there, and so, you know, otherwise though, one thing that I've been noticing is that it feels really refined in here. It's pretty quiet. You don't hear too much of the outside, and again, with some of the other crossovers in this segment just being like lifted hatchbacks, they sometimes suffer in that refinement area, and this doesn't. You know, I think from the ground up they wanted to make it a substantial feeling SUV. It feels very solid, like I said, when you're closing the doors, when you're, you know, everything feels very solid in it. It feels a little heavier and solid as well in the driving, but it makes you feel like you're driving around a quality, you know, well-built vehicle, I guess. You know, and like I said, all the refinement and the sound deadening really goes a long way to make this feel luxurious and feel like you're in a full-blown luxury vehicle. One thing I forgot to mention when I was talking about the interior as well, that you notice when you're driving especially, is that they even have this nice padding right by the transmission tunnel area. So when you're resting your leg up against that, it's nice and softly padded, and so that feels really great. It seems like, you know, every square inch of it they paid attention to. Everything feels very good about it. And it feels pretty good to drive too. Again, for the segment we're talking about, you know, a small crossover, not a sports car by any means. If you want something that feels sportier, I would still definitely recommend something like the Lexus IS. That feels, you know, a good bit sportier, and, you know, a little more dialed in, and obviously a lot flatter and things like that. And so, you know, if you want, you know, a really sporty driving experience in a small vehicle, I would suggest that in the Lexus range. But, you know, if you need the extra versatility, you like the larger size here of the NX, I think this is still, you know, really nice driving SUV. Although, you know, I'd be curious to see what the non-F Sport version feels like, because, you know, I think this still could feel this could be a little bit better. It could be a little firmer. It could be even a little sportier. And maybe they'll do some type of full-blown NX F version to address that someday. But in the meantime, you know, this F Sport version feels pretty good to drive. Another interesting thing, talking about the ride and the handling here, is the ride is just really smooth and feels very soft and luxurious. And like I said, maybe that's part of the reason why you don't have quite as sharp handling as you do in maybe some of the other F Sport Lexus crossovers. But I really like it still, because it handles well enough, again, for the class that it's in. But it just, you know, just has this really just soft, floaty kind of feel to it whenever, you know, you're just cruising. One thing though that does feel good, and I think has actually been tuned for 2018, is I think it's supposed to have slightly better turn in. And I haven't driven the previous, you know, non-refresh NX to compare, but I will say that it does turn in nicely. And you know, that certainly helps it to feel eager and willing, even if it isn't super sharp. But anyway, I'm going to be driving this vehicle for a few more days here, and I'll come back and give you guys my final thoughts on, you know, the fuel economy and the price, and any other things that I noticed through my week of driving. Alright, so I've been driving the 2018 Lexus NX 300 F Sport here for a few more days, and it's a really nice small crossover. You know, I think really it's one of the nicest small crossovers in the luxury segment that I've personally driven. It just, you know, it feels a little bigger, it feels more solid than a lot of the competitors that, again, a lot of the competitors just don't, they're smaller, they're a little more cramped feeling, you know, they aren't as nice inside. This just really seems to outdo a lot of them, and is a really nice driving vehicle as well. One thing that's interesting that I didn't mention yet is this has a dynamic torque vectoring all-wheel drive system here, at least in the F Sport version, and so it does a pretty good job of putting the power down, but I do feel what feels like torque steer coming through the front wheels. If I really stomp on it, I can feel the steering wheel twitching a little bit as it's trying to you know, work through those front wheels, and I would think that it would put more power to the rear, so that didn't happen. I didn't get that sensation, but just something to note there. You know, but it does add a little bit of drama to the experience. I wouldn't say it's full-on torque steer. It's not like some front-wheel drive hot hatch or anything like that, but just you feel a little bit of twitching there, and that's something that usually with a front-wheel drive car you expect, but not so much with an all-wheel drive vehicle. So before destination, these start at just under $40,000. It's like $39,775. This one, as tested, which has the F Sport package, and then, you know, F Sport Plus and all that type of stuff, ends up being right around $48,000. I think it's like $48,160. And so, you know, even at that price, like I said, you get a more substantial vehicle than some of the others. And you know, I think honestly this could even compare with some of the slightly larger vehicles in the segment. I even really compare this to stuff like the GLC, because it is pretty close in size. You know, it's a very minute differences, and I think that, you know, for the price, this is a really compelling option. Again, the F Sport version is nice, but, you know, it's not that much sportier. That I'm sure you could probably, if you didn't want the more aggressive styling, you could go for the non-F Sport version and save yourself a little bit of money. You wouldn't get quite as much of the sportiness, so it just depends on, again, how much of that you want. If you want the paddle shifters and you want the sportier steering wheel, sportier seats, all that type of stuff. If you don't need all that kind of stuff, I mean, you can be looking at one of these in the, you know, low 40,000 range, and that's a really nice luxurious vehicle for not much money, and especially a crossover too, which you know, can sometimes get pricey in some of the other competing offerings. So really good there. One thing that is on par with what I usually see with my test vehicles here that I get as press vehicles is the fuel economy. Now, these are rated at 22 in the city, 27 on the highway, for a combined average of 24. In my real world testing, which was mostly stop and go city stuff, a little bit of highway, but very little, I ended up getting an average of 19.6 miles per gallon over about 140 miles of driving. So that I burned through about a half tank of gas during that time, and you know, it's pretty out in line with some of the others. Again, for a SUV that weighs 4,000 pounds, I think you know, basically 20 miles per gallon isn't bad, again, for just strictly stop and go stuff. You know, I really like this little engine, by the way. You know, I'm sure that, you know, if I did a little more highway and stuff, I'd get closer to those averages, and I think, you know, right around, you know, this kind of fuel economy for an SUV of this size is perfectly acceptable. But this engine, one last thing I want to mention before I go is I kind of like the sound of it. You know, I mean, it is, you know, a fairly standard sounding 4-cylinder turbo, but it has a little bit of a Subaru kind of growl to it to me. it sounds, you know, pretty good. It also has a funny turbo sound that, especially whenever you're at low speeds and you're starting out, it has this like whoa sound to it. It's really strange. It almost sounds like you have like a UFO hovering above you or something. It's kind of hard to hear. It really comes and goes, but it definitely is the turbo, because I watched the boost gauge and it definitely comes on at the same time as the, you know, the boost gauge is showing that it's making boost. So it's just a cool little thing, you know, to remind you this is a turbocharged vehicle. But yeah, overall, you know, I'm pretty impressed with the NX. I mean, obviously, you know, small crossovers aren't my favorite thing, because I'm into, you know, more sportier vehicles, and I would still recommend something like the IS if you want something, you know, more sporty. But if you do want the additional practicality, the, you know, higher ride height, that type of stuff, I think this is a very solid offering from Lexus here, and well worth checking out. So anyway, huge thanks once again to Lexus for providing me with this NX to review for you guys today. Let me know your thoughts on the NX in the comments below. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Take care.